They asked me my daughter's name. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I forgot. The name itself was gone. The space in my head where it lived is now a smooth, cold void. They think I'm broken, a casualty of a mission gone wrong. They're mistaken. I am not the casualty, I am the witness. I'm the one who remembers why it's gone. I remember the silence. I remember the light. I remember Tartarus. And you need to listen, because it's coming for your names next. The debriefing room is white, sterile. They think the clean slate will help me talk. They're wrong. The only thing that feels real anymore is the grime under my fingernails, the last physical piece of that island I carry with me. They call me Ghost, and for the first time the call sign feels less like a title and more like a diagnosis. They slide a bottle of water across the steel table. They ask me to start at the beginning. The beginning. That was a lifetime ago. Back when the world made sense. Insertion was clean, I hear myself say, the words sounding distant, rehearsed. 0 dark 30. Zodiacs cut through the North Atlantic chop like scalpels. No moon, full cloud cover, perfect conditions. Even as I say it, the memory feels tainted, like a photograph left out in the sun. There were 4 of us. Spectre team. The best there is at acquiring assets from places that don't officially exist. There was Anya, our oracle. Fingers like hummingbirds on a keyboard, she could slice through firewalls that would make a nation-state blush. She was our eyes and ears, our ghost in the machine. Then there was Marcus, Rhino. A walking battering ram stuffed into tactical gear. If a door was locked, he was the key. If there was a problem, his solution was usually measured in grains of lead or pounds of C4. Quiet Ben, our surgeon, was the field medic. He could stitch you up in the middle of a hurricane with nothing but a needle and a steady hand. He was the one who was supposed to put us back together. And then there was me, Ghost, the team lead, the planner, the one who was supposed to see the angles, to anticipate the threats. My job was to get them in, get the package, and get them out. I failed on 2 of 3 counts. Our target was Tartarus. That's not its real name, of course. It's just what the client called it. An uncharted speck of rock in the middle of nowhere, chosen for its anonymity. The brief was simple, if insane. A black site prison holding 1 man, a corporate scientist named Dr. Aris Thorne. He'd developed something his employers wanted buried, and when he tried to defect, they buried him with it. Our job was to dig him up. The pay was astronomical, the kind of money that lets you disappear and buy a new life. I should have known that no payday is worth your own name. The first thing that was wrong was the silence. "You've been in quiet places before," the man in the suit says from the other side of the table. He has a kind face. It's the kindest faces you have to watch out for. "No," I reply, my voice raspy. "Not like this. This wasn't quiet. It was empty. We cut the engines on the Zodiacs 100 meters from shore, and the silence just fell on us. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was a presence. A thick, heavy blanket that smothered sound before it could be born. I remember looking at Rhino. Even he, a man who communicated primarily through grunts and the cycling of a shotgun, looked unnerved. We were in the middle of the ocean. We should have heard the waves crashing on the black volcanic rock of the shore. We should have heard the wind whistling past our ears, the cry of a lone gull. There was nothing. The water lapped against the beach with the soundless quality of a dream. Our feet on the gravel made no crunch. It was the first rule of our reality to be broken. Cause no longer produced effect. "Oracle, what are you getting?" I sub-vocalized into my comms. Her reply was a burst of static before her voice came through, strained. "Nothing, Ghost, I mean nothing. No RF signals, no infrared signatures, no animal life on thermal. The island is a dead zone. According to my gear, it shouldn't even be here." We moved inland toward the coordinates for the prison complex. The vegetation was strange, stunted grayish-green trees that looked like they were holding their breath. The air was cold and still, carrying no scent of salt or soil. It was like walking through a photograph. We were ghosts already, we just didn't know it yet. The prison was a monument to brutalist architecture, a single ugly block of concrete and rebar squatting in the center of the island, a cancer on the landscape. There were guard towers, but they were empty. The perimeter fence was intact, but the main gate was wide open, groaning softly on its hinges in a breeze we couldn't feel. "Smells like a trap," Rhino muttered, racking his shotgun. The sound was horribly loud in the oppressive stillness, a violation. "It's too quiet for a trap," I said, my hand on my pistol. "Traps have triggers. This place has nothing." We entered the main compound, sweeping through the buildings with a practiced, terrifying efficiency. The scene inside was worse than any firefight I could have imagined. It was a perfect, pristine portrait of abandonment. In the mess hall, trays of food sat on tables. A greyish film of mold just beginning to form. A coffee mug was overturned, a dark stain spreading across the concrete floor. In the barracks, bunks were left unmade, a paperback novel lying face down on a pillow. In the control room, a bank of monitors showed static, and a half-finished game of chess sat on a side table, the White Queen poised to take a black knight. It was the Mary Celeste on a grand scale. 100 men had lived here, and they had all vanished in the same instant. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, no bullet casings. Nothing was broken, save for the fundamental law that people don't just cease to be. "Ghost!" Oracle's voice crackled in my ear, pulling me from my daze. "You need to see this. The server room." I found her in a climate-controlled room, a single server rack humming softly against a wall. It was the only sound we'd heard since the shotgun rack. Anya was pale, her fingers hovering over her console. "What is it, Oracle?" "The logs," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Guard rotations, supply manifests, prisoner records, surveillance footage. It's all gone." "Wiped?" I asked. "A failsafe?" She shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion of disbelief. "No, not wiped. Wiping leaves a trace, a shadow. This is different. The space on the drives is empty, but it's not formatted. It's pristine. It's like the data was never written in the first place. The security footage doesn't just cut out. The files for the last 72 hours simply don't exist. It's not that the history was erased, it's that it never happened." A cold dread, colder than the island air, began to coil in my gut. This wasn't a cover-up. You can't cover up something that never was. This was a violation of reality itself. We convened in the central courtyard. The place was an exercise in bleak geometry, a square of concrete surrounded by 4 windowless walls. In the exact center of the yard sat a single object that didn't belong. It was a heavy, bolted-down metal chair, the kind you'd see in an old asylum, facing a concrete wall. In front of the chair was a projector. It was an ancient, bulky thing, a relic from a bygone era, all whirring gears and film reels. Except there was no film, and it wasn't whirring. It was on. A perfect, silent, rectangular beam of brilliant white light shot from its lens, hitting the wall with an intensity that hurt the eyes. It wasn't illuminating the concrete, it was overwriting it. The patch of wall it touched seemed smoother, flatter than the rest. The light gave off no heat. It was connected to no visible power source. But the most unsettling thing was the hum. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a pressure you felt behind your eyes, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to pluck at the strings of your thoughts, making it hard to focus. "What the hell is that?" Surgeon asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Looks like some kind of interrogation device," Rhino grunted, stepping forward. "Psychological warfare." "Don't touch it," I ordered. The hum was getting stronger, and I could feel a headache building, a strange sense of vertigo. It felt like the world was tilting on its axis. "Why not?" Rhino scoffed, always the impatient one. "It's just a light. We're on the clock, Ghost. The package isn't here. This whole place is a bust. Let's wreck the joint and get out of here." Before I could stop him, he swung his boot back and kicked the projector with all his considerable force. The impact was a dull, metallic clang. For a split second, nothing happened. The light flickered, then died. And then the sound hit us. It wasn't a scream. A scream is human. This was the sound of a universe being torn apart. It was a billion voices crying out in unison, a chorus of agony, terror, and loss that erupted not from the projector but from every direction at once. It slammed into us like a physical wave, buckling our knees and making our teeth ache. It was the sound of every person who had vanished from this place. Their final moment of existence played back at once. The silent island had found its voice, and it was the sound of damnation. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was different. It was heavier, hungrier. The old silence had been empty. This new silence was full of a terrible, waiting presence. Rhino was on the ground, clutching his head. Oracle was retching. Surgeon was staring at the blank wall, his face a mask of pure horror. I stood there, the psychic echo of that scream still ringing in the hollows of my soul, and I knew. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic and reason. We hadn't just broken a machine, we had broken a cage, and we were locked inside with whatever had just been set free. The investigation was over. The hunt had just begun. If you want to know how we lost more than just our lives on that cursed rock, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. You need to understand what's coming. You need to know how to fight the silence. The echo of that psychic cataclysm faded, but it left a residue behind, a stain on the air itself. The new silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a hungry, listening void. We were 4 statues in a concrete courtyard, each locked in our own private hell. My ears rang with a phantom tinnitus. Beside me, Anya was on her hands and knees, dry heaving, her knuckles white where she gripped the cracked pavement. Ben, surgeon, was simply staring at the wall where the light had been, his face slack with a profound, unblinking shock. It was Rhino who moved first. He staggered to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His face, usually a mask of stoic aggression, was pale and slick with sweat. He looked violated. What was that ghost? What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of tactics and contingencies, felt sluggish. The thoughts were there, but they were swimming through molasses. "Everyone, sound off," I commanded, my voice sounding thin and brittle. "Status report." "Oracle, fine," Anya managed to gasp, wiping her mouth with the back of her glove. "Just, my head feels like it's full of bees." "Surgeon? Ben?" I called out. He didn't respond for a long moment. Then he blinked slowly, like a man waking from a deep and troubled sleep. "I'm here," he said, his voice distant. I saw things. In my head." "We all did," I said, though the images were already fading, leaving behind only the ghost of an unimaginable agony. "Rhino, you good?" He spat on the ground. "Never better. Just point me at what I need to shoot." The bravado was a flimsy shield, and I could see the tremor in his hands. He was the one who broke the seal. He was feeling it most. My first instinct, my training, screamed at me to pull the plug on the mission. Abort. Get back to the water and leave this cursed island to its silence. But the psychic blast, or whatever it was, had been followed by a complete communications blackout. Anya confirmed it moments later, her face grim. "Comms are dead, Ghost, not just jammed. It's like the entire radio spectrum just ceased to exist. I'm getting nothing but white noise. We were cut off, stranded. The mission parameters had changed. Extraction was out. Survival was in." "All right," I said, forcing a tone of command into my voice that I didn't feel. "We find a defensible position. We figure out what the hell is going on, and we find a way off this rock. We start with the command center. There has to be a hardline, a backup system." The walk back to the administration building was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. The oppressive silence was now laced with a kind of anticipation. It felt like we were being watched, not by eyes, but by the island itself. It was aware of us. In the chaos of our retreat, Rhino had stumbled, scraping his forearm on a jagged piece of rebar. It was a nasty gash, deep and bleeding freely. "Ben, patch him up," I ordered, as we secured the doors to the main control room. Surgeon nodded, his movements still a little wooden. He knelt and unzipped his medkit, a state-of-the-art trauma pack he could navigate blindfolded. He pulled out a sterile wipe and a suture kit. He cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency. Then he stopped. He was holding the suture needle and the forceps, one in each hand. He stared at them. A look of profound confusion washed over his face. His brow furrowed. He looked from the needle to the bloody gash on Rhino's arm, and then back to the needle. "Ben, what is it?" I asked, my voice sharp. He began, his voice trembling slightly. How does this part go?" Rhino stared at him. What do you mean? How does it go? You stitch me up. You've done it 100 times. I know, Surgeon whispered, a thread of panic weaving into his tone. I know I have. But the knowledge, it's just not there. It's like trying to remember a word that's right on the tip of your tongue, but it's gone. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was far more chilling than any physical threat. Ghost, I can't remember how to put in a stitch. A cold dread washed over me. I pushed him aside, grabbing a roll of gauze and a pressure bandage. Just wrap it, tight, I snapped. My own medical training was rudimentary, but it was still there. For now. As Ben fumbled with the bandage, his expert hands suddenly clumsy and uncertain, I saw Anya staring at her tactical console. Her expression was a mirror of Ben's confusion. Oracle, talk to me. My keyboard, she said softly, not looking up. I was going to try and bypass the comms block, run a diagnostic on the local network. I looked down at the keys, and for a second, I didn't recognize them. She touched a key, the letter Q. This shape, this symbol. I know what it is, but for a heartbeat, it was just a meaningless squiggle, an alien hieroglyph. She finally met my gaze, her own fear a palpable thing. It's not just Ben, is it? Something is happening to us. The room fell silent. The true nature of the threat was beginning to dawn on us, a slow, horrifying sunrise. This wasn't a monster that would hunt us in the dark. It wasn't a soldier who would shoot at us. The enemy was inside our own heads. It was a thief, and it was stealing the very things that made us who we were. Rhino was the next to break. He stood up, the makeshift bandage on his arm already soaking through. This is a trick, he snarled, his eyes darting around the room looking for a hidden speaker, a gas vent. It's psychotropic gas, some kind of frequency messing with our brains. I've seen this crap before. He was trying to fit the incomprehensible into a box he understood, a box he could smash. There's no gas, Anya said, her voice shaky but firm. I've been running atmospheric scans since we landed. The air is clean. Then it's something else, Rhino roared, his fear curdling into rage. And I'm not waiting around for my brain to leak out of my ears. He strode over to his gear, grabbing his primary weapon and a spare ammunition pack. I'm gonna find this Thorn bastard. He knows what's going on. Rhino, stand down, I ordered. We stick together. We don't know what we're... My words were cut off by the sound of him working the action on his rifle, followed by a curse. What the hell? He frantically ejected the magazine and slapped another one in. Same result. He tore the magazine out and pulled a single round from it, holding it up in the dim light of the control room. We all stared at it. It was a bullet. But it was also not a bullet. The brass casing was there. The primer was at the base. But the projectile itself, the slug, was wrong. It was perfectly smooth, a featureless cone of lead with no rifling grooves, no pointed tip, no discernible shape designed for penetration. It was a useless, rounded lump of metal. He tore open a sealed box of ammunition from his pack. He poured the contents onto a table. They were all the same. Every single bullet had been reduced to this simplified, useless form. What is this? He whispered, his rage collapsing into a raw, hollow confusion. He looked at his rifle, the weapon that was an extension of his own identity, and for the first time, he looked at it as a stranger. It doesn't work. It's not the gun, Rhino, Anya breathed, her face ashen. Here's the concept. The thing on this island, it doesn't just make you forget things, it unmakes them. That was the moment our discipline finally shattered. Rhino let out a wordless yell of pure fury and despair. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just a terrified man who had been rendered impotent. He accused Anya of sabotaging his gear with some high-tech nanite garbage. He shoved Ben, calling him useless. He was a cornered animal, and his world had just been stripped of its claws and teeth. I had to put him down, a hard right cross to the jaw. He went down in a heap, more from shock than the force of the blow. As he lay there breathing heavily, I knew our team was broken. We weren't Spectre anymore. We were just 4 people waiting to be undone. Leaving Ben to watch over the sedated Rhino, Anya and I made a decision. We couldn't fight an enemy we didn't understand. Our only hope was information. The scientist, Aris Thorn, was the key. But he was gone. That left one other source, the man in charge of this facility. "The warden's office," I said. "It's the one place we haven't checked." The office was at the top of the administrative block, a stark, functional room with a large window overlooking the bleak courtyard. It was as empty as the rest of the prison, but on the desk there was a single leather-bound journal. It was filled with a neat, precise script. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Anya and I read it together, our shoulders touching, 2 small points of warmth in the encroaching cold. The warden's name was Elias Vance. His early entries were clinical, describing the facility's unique purpose. October 12th, one entry read, "Phase 1 of the Tartarus project is complete. The containment field is stable." Dr. Thorne refers to the anomaly as a conceptual entropy field. He claims it doesn't destroy matter or energy, but rather it erodes the informational patterns that give them meaning. A bullet becomes a lump of metal. A word becomes a meaningless sound. A man becomes a collection of biological processes with no memory or identity. A terrifyingly elegant weapon if it can be controlled. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a prison for a man. It was a laboratory, and the anomaly was their experiment. November 3rd. We introduced the first subject, D451, to the unshielded field today. The degradation was rapid. First, he lost complex skills, language, the ability to solve a simple puzzle. Then he lost personal memories. He could not recall his name or the faces of his family. The final stage was the most disturbing. He lost core concepts. He forgot how to walk. He forgot how to eat. He simply lay on the floor, a breathing organism with no guiding intelligence. Within 12 hours, he was gone. Not dead. His body mass was still present. He had just ceased to be. Anya made a small, choked sound. I put a hand on her shoulder, and we kept reading. The final entries were a descent into madness. Vance wrote about how the projector, the containment emitter as Thorne called it, was the only thing focusing the field, keeping it from spreading. It didn't block the effect. It drew it in, like a drain. But it needed to be powered. December 7th. Thorne's calculations were wrong. The emitter requires a constant influx of complex information to maintain focus. It feeds on it. We've been cycling D-class personnel through the focus chair for weeks. We project their entire consciousness into the beam. It keeps the field stable, but the cost... The screams are silent, but I still hear them in my sleep. We are feeding souls into a machine to keep a void at bay. Then came the last entry, scrawled in a frantic, barely legible hand. December 19th. It's breaking down. The field is growing stronger. It's starting to affect us even through the shielding. Jenkins forgot his own wife's name this morning. The emitter is failing. Thorne is gone. He didn't escape. I think he walked into the beam. He said he wanted to understand it from the inside. There's only one option left, full lockdown. God help us. We haven't contained it. We've just been marinating in it. I closed the journal. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, final clarity. There was no escape. The island wasn't a prison, it was a bomb. And Rhino had just pulled the pin. As if on cue, a low groan echoed from the courtyard below. I rushed to the window, Anya right behind me. We looked down at the concrete square where the projector sat, now dark and inert. Something was wrong with the shadows. The shadow cast by the west wall was darker than it should be. It was a patch of absolute blackness, a void that seemed to drink the grey afternoon light. It wasn't a shadow, it was a hole in the world. As we watched, a piece of loose gravel rolled off the roof and fell. It tumbled through the air and crossed into the patch of darkness. It didn't hit the ground. It just vanished. No sound, no impact. It was there and then it wasn't. The anomaly was no longer just a passive field. It wasn't just in our heads anymore. It was free, and it was beginning to erase the world. For a long moment, nobody breathed. We stood at the warden's window, 4 pairs of eyes fixed on that impossible patch of anti-reality in the courtyard. It was a wound in the world, a glimpse into the absolute zero of existence. The gravel that had rolled into it hadn't been destroyed. It had been revoked. The sight disconnected some fundamental wiring in my brain, the part that believes in cause and effect. in the permanence of matter. "We need to move," Anya whispered, her voice tight with a control that was costing her everything. "Now, before that thing decides to come upstairs." Her words broke the spell. We backed away from the window, a primal fear taking over that had nothing to do with training or tactics. This was the fear of the dark, amplified to a philosophical absolute. We retreated from the office, every instinct screaming at us to put as many walls as possible between ourselves and that courtyard. We found a small windowless maintenance closet on a lower floor. I barricaded the door with a heavy steel locker. It was a useless, symbolic gesture. You can't barricade a hole in the universe. We huddled together in the cramped darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of Anya's console screen. Rhino had sunk into a sullen, brooding silence, rocking slightly on his heels. Ben sat with his back against the wall, staring at his own hands as if they were alien artifacts he'd just discovered. "What is it?" I asked him, my voice a low rumble. "What does it do?" "It's not a thing, Ghost," Anya corrected, her fingers flying across her keyboard, a desperate search for patterns in the chaos. "It's a process, a negation. The Warden called it conceptual entropy. Everything in the universe is information. A tree is a pattern of cells. A memory is a pattern of neurons. A bullet is a pattern of metal shaped with purpose. This field, it doesn't break the pattern. It simplifies it. It smooths it out until it becomes nothing. It's a universal solvent for meaning." The silence that followed her explanation was profound. She had given a name to our doom. We were complex patterns of thought, memory, and skill. We were prime targets. We were food. The first sign that it was inside with us was subtle. The air in the closet grew colder. A strange metallic tang, like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike, filled our nostrils. Then a flicker. On the far wall, a spot of darkness, no bigger than a coin, appeared. It wasn't a shadow. It was a perfect, depthless circle of black. Rhino saw it and scrambled back, a strangled cry escaping his lips. "It's here! It's in here with us!" "Quiet!" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Noise! Panic! That's complex information. Don't feed it!" But it was too late. The small dot of erasure quivered, then began to expand, slowly, silently, like a drop of ink spreading on wet paper. It grew to the size of a dinner plate, a blind spot in our reality, and it seemed to be listening. Then the true horror began. It wasn't just erasing the world around us. It started to erase the world within us. I heard a sound, a girl's laughter. For a split second, my heart seized in my chest. It was the exact sound of my daughter's laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in 5 years, not since the accident. It was so real, so pure. It felt like she was right outside the door. I felt an overwhelming, irrational urge to tear the barricade down and run to her. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice choked. Anya looked at me, her face a mask of confusion. "Hear what, Ghost?" "I didn't hear anything." The laughter came again, closer this time, clearer. It was a perfect echo from my own memory, weaponized. The anomaly was rifling through my mind, pulling out the things that meant the most to me and using them as bait. It wasn't just a solvent, it was a predator, a cunning, intelligent predator that hunted with nostalgia and love. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the cold steel of the wall, the grime on the floor, the tangible reality of the moment. "It's a trick," I gritted out. "It's in our heads. It's using our memories." As if to prove my point, Ben let out a soft weeping sound. "My wife," he whispered, tears tracing paths through the dirt on his cheeks. "I can smell her perfume. Lilacs. She always wore lilacs." He was staring at a blank corner of the closet, a faint beatific smile on his face, lost in a memory that was being dangled in front of him like a lure. The spot of nothingness on the wall began to drift towards him, drawn by the complexity of his grief and his love. It was a conceptual shark, and Ben was bleeding memories into the water. "Ben, no!" Anya cried, reaching for him. "Snap out of it. It's not real." Her voice seemed to break through. Ben's smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter desolation. "But I can almost see her face," he stammered. Then his expression twisted in horror. "Almost. I can't quite picture her eyes anymore. They're blurry. He was losing her. The anomaly was offering him the ghost of his most precious memory, and the price was the memory itself. It was feeding on the very thing it was using as bait. It was the most exquisitely cruel form of torture I could possibly conceive. The blind spot on the wall was now 3 feet wide, a silent, patient mouth. It stopped its advance on Ben, a new target having presented itself. Rhino, whose mind had been a whirlwind of fear and rage, had gone unnervingly still. He was staring at his own reflection in the polished screen of a piece of disconnected equipment. "Marcus," I said, using his real name for the first time on the mission. He didn't answer. He raised a hand and touched his face, his fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "This face," he said, his voice a hollow monotone. "I know this face. But who is he?" He was looking at himself without recognition. The concept of self was beginning to fray at the edges. The informational pattern that defined him as Marcus was being simplified, smoothed over. This was the end game. This was how they vanished. You weren't just killed. You were unwritten. The situation was spiraling. Ben was losing his past. Rhino was losing his present. And the physical manifestation of the erasure was growing bolder. It wasn't just one spot now. Smaller patches of nothing began to appear, flickering in and out of existence on the walls, the ceiling, the floor. We were trapped in a box with a spreading sentient plague of non-existence. "We have to move," Anya said, her voice steely. She had forced her own emotions down, her mind a fortress of pure logic. "Staying here, thinking, remembering. That's a death sentence. We need to get out of the complex, get outside." "Outside where?" I countered. "The whole island is the kill zone." "But it's bigger, more diffuse," she reasoned. "Here, in these confined spaces, the effect is concentrated. And I've noticed something. The voids, they flicker, they aren't constant. There's a rhythm to it, a cycle. Maybe we can move between the pulses." It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. The alternative was to sit here and wait for our own minds to be scooped out. "Okay," I said, making a decision. "On my mark. We move fast and we move quiet. Don't think, don't talk, just run. We head for the east exit. Go." I heaved the locker away from the door and burst out into the corridor. For a moment it was clear. Then the world blinked. A void the size of a man materialized directly in our path. We skidded to a halt. It hung in the air, a silent vertical tear in the corridor. There was no way around. Before I could shout a warning, Ben started walking towards it. He wasn't panicked, he wasn't screaming. He was calm, his face empty of all emotion. The conceptual echoes had done their work. They had hollowed him out, leaving only a shell. He was a man with no memories, no purpose, no self. He was a simple pattern now, and he was being drawn towards the ultimate simplicity. "Ben, get back!" I yelled, reaching for him. My fingers brushed his shoulder, but it was too late. He stepped into the erasure. There was no sound. There was no flash of light. There was no struggle. One moment, Ben was there, a man in a tactical uniform. The next, his form simplified. The details bled away in an instant. The texture of his uniform, the creases around his eyes, the color of his hair, it all blurred into a vague, indistinct human shape. It was like watching a sculptor smooth over a clay figure, wiping away all its defining features. Then, the shape itself dissolved into the nothingness. He was gone. Deleted. No body, no blood, not even a ghost. The corridor was just empty. The universe didn't even register his passing. The sight broke something in Rhino. The quiet, confused man was gone, replaced by a creature of pure, primal rage. The loss of his comrade, the stripping of his own identity, the sheer mind-bending horror of what he had just witnessed. It was too much. "No!" he bellowed, the sound echoing through the concrete halls like a thunderclap. It was the loudest, most complex sound we had made since arriving, and the island answered. The voids in the corridor pulsed violently. They swelled in size, the darkness deepening. More appeared, coalescing out of thin air, drawn to Rhino's raw, powerful burst of emotion. He had just rung the dinner bell. "You want a fight?" he screamed at the empty air, at the silent patches of nothing. He had forgotten how to use his gun, but he hadn't forgotten violence. He ripped a fire extinguisher off the wall, a solid, simple club of painted steel. "Come on, face me!" He began to smash the extinguisher against the walls, the floor, against a bank of monitors, sending sparks flying. Each impact was a defiance. Each clang was a shout of existence against the encroaching silence. He was a dying star going supernova, determined to burn as brightly as possible before being extinguished. "Rhino, stop!" Anya screamed, but he was beyond hearing. He was lost in a glorious suicidal rage, and the conceptual hunt, drawn by the beautiful complex symphony of his fury, converged on our position. The corridor began to flicker, the walls seeming to waver as dozens of patches of erasure bloomed all around us. We were trapped. The exits were gone, replaced by silent, hungry mouths of nothing. Anya and I were caught in the storm of one man's final, desperate act of being. And the void, the patient, silent predator, was closing in to feed. Rhino's final stand was a masterpiece of pointless, beautiful defiance. It was the last symphony of a man who had been reduced to his most basic function, to struggle. He was no longer Marcus, the soldier. He was a cornered animal, and his roar of existence was the most complex, most delicious signal the anomaly had detected since the initial psychic scream. The voids answered his call. The corridor became a strobe-lit nightmare. Patches of erasure bloomed and withered in fractions of a second, their silent, hungry mouths appearing on every surface. It was like standing inside a failing light bulb, with reality as the filament. The air grew thick and heavy, and a disorienting pressure built in my sinuses, as if the very dimensions of the hallway were flexing and groaning. "Come on!" Rhino bellowed, swinging the heavy fire extinguisher like a warhammer. He wasn't aiming at anything in particular. He was aiming at the encroaching nothingness itself. He charged at the largest void, a shimmering man-sized tear that had consumed half the far wall. "You want me? Take me." He swung the steel cylinder with all his might. It passed into the edge of the void. The result was not an impact. It was a lesson in physics being rewritten. The half of the extinguisher that entered the field simply vanished. There was no clang of metal on concrete, no shower of sparks. The extinguisher was suddenly half its original size, sheared off with impossible precision. The newly exposed metal, a flat, featureless gray. Rhino stumbled, thrown off balance by the sudden lack of resistance. He stared at the ruined weapon in his hands, his face a canvas of disbelief. The concept of impact, of solid matter meeting solid matter, had just been locally repealed. He had swung a weapon, and the universe had simply said no. He screamed again, a raw, guttural sound of frustration, and swung the broken cylinder at a nearby wall panel. This time the metal connected. But the sound was wrong. It was a dull, wet thud, like hitting a side of beef. The steel panel didn't dent. It rippled, the metal behaving like thick fluid for a horrifying instant before becoming solid again. The anomaly was playing with him. It was corrupting the rules. It wasn't just deleting things anymore. It was twisting them, turning the predictable solid world into a madman's dream. The voids swarmed him. One flickered into existence around his feet. He didn't fall into it. Instead, the floor beneath his boots lost its solidity. He was suddenly ankle-deep in the concrete as if it were quicksand. He roared in pain and confusion, trying to pull his legs free from the stone that was no longer stone. "Anya, move!" I yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. There was nothing we could do for him. He was the lightning rod, and we were standing too close. Another void, small and fast as a wasp, blinked into being before his face. It touched his open, screaming mouth. The scream cut off, not choked off. It simply stopped, the sound file deleted mid-play. His mouth was still open, his throat straining, but no sound emerged. The concept of his voice had been taken. He was a silent movie of agony. He tore at his throat, his eyes wide with a new, deeper terror. He had lost his weapon. He had lost his footing. Now he had lost his rage. The one tool he had left was gone. He was dismantled piece by piece. The intricate pattern of his combat boots simplified into smooth gray shapes fused with the floor. The texture of his tactical vest blurred, the webbing and pouches melting into a single uniform surface. The anomaly was not eating him. It was editing him. stripping away the layers of detail, of complexity, of identity. His final moments were a silent, desperate struggle. He tried to raise his fists, but the knowledge of how to make a fist was gone. His hands were just limp, useless appendages. He tried to look at us, to plead, to warn, but the recognition in his eyes faded. He was no longer Marcus. He was just a shape. A human-shaped collection of matter that was being relentlessly, methodically simplified. The last thing to go was his face. The lines of anger and fear softened, the features blurred, the skin became a smooth, mannequin-like surface. For a heartbeat, he was a featureless statue trapped in the floor. Then the voids converged, and the statue was gone. The floor was just a flat, unbroken slab of concrete once more. The storm ceased as quickly as it had begun. With Rhino's complex, violent existence erased, the anomaly's primary food source was gone. The flickering voids in the corridor stabilized, then slowly began to recede, the hungry mouths closing. The oppressive pressure in the air lessened. Anya and I were left alone in the silent, violated hallway. The only evidence that Marcus had ever existed was the faint scent of ozone and the half a fire extinguisher lying on the floor. I stared at the spot where he had been, my mind struggling to process the sheer totality of his end. He hadn't just died. He had been made to have never been. The universe would not mourn him because it had already forgotten him. It fed on him, Anya whispered, her voice trembling. His anger, his fear, his struggle. It was a feast. It's a predator that hunts with physics, I said, my own voice a hollow rasp. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold, soul-deep exhaustion. So what do we do? How do we fight an enemy that eats thought? We were still trapped. The voids had receded, but they hadn't vanished. They pulsed gently on the walls, waiting for us to think, to feel, to give them a reason to grow again. Anya was staring into the middle distance, her gaze unfocused. Her analytical mind was working, sifting through the horror, looking for a variable, a weakness. Rhino's rage made them swarm, she murmured, thinking aloud. Our fear, Ben's grief, it drew them in. The scream we heard when the projector broke is the most complex signal of all. It's drawn to information, to complexity. That's its nature. She turned to me, her eyes suddenly sharp, alight with a terrifying, desperate idea. So what's the opposite? What does it ignore? The answer was so simple, so contrary to every survival instinct I had, that it took me a moment to grasp it. Simplicity, I breathed. Emptiness. Exactly, she said, her voice gaining strength. We can't outrun it, we can't outfight it. We have to become invisible to it. We have to become conceptually quiet. We have to empty our minds. It was the single most insane, tactical plan I had ever heard. To survive, we had to willingly dismantle our own consciousness. To stop being a target, we had to stop being ourselves. How? I asked. How do we just stop thinking? We don't, she said, taking a deep, calming breath. We focus on one thing, one simple, meaningless thing, the sound of your own breathing, the feeling of the floor beneath your boots. No memories, no plans, no fear. We become meditative. We make ourselves into the simplest possible pattern. This was our weapon, the weapon that doesn't shoot. It was a shield made of nothing. The warden's journal, I remembered, the thought itself a dangerous spike of complexity. Thorne's lab. It has to be shielded. It's our only chance. I knew the general direction from the schematics I'd memorized. Another dangerous memory. I had to let it go. I had to reduce it to a simple, instinctual vector. That way. Okay, I said, meeting Anya's gaze. We were about to take a leap of faith into the deepest, darkest part of our own minds. Lead the way, Oracle. We stood side by side, closed our eyes for a moment, and centered ourselves. I focused on my breath. In, out. A simple, biological rhythm. I pushed away the image of Rhino's face dissolving. I pushed away the memory of my daughter's laugh. I pushed away my training, my name, my very sense of self. I became a machine that breathed and walked. We opened our eyes and began to move. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. We walked slowly, deliberately, down the flickering corridor. We walked past the voids. One pulsed on the wall to my left, a silent vortex of absolute cold. I could feel it tugging at the edges of my thoughts, tasting, searching for purchase. A memory of my first day in basic training flared in my mind. Complex, dangerous. I let it go, returning my focus to the sound of my boots on the concrete. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. The void seemed to lose interest, its pull lessening. We moved through the abandoned complex like ghosts. We passed the mess hall, the barracks, each location a minefield of potential memories. We had to navigate them with our minds turned off. It was a tightrope walk over a bottomless pit, and the rope was our own concentration. I could feel Anya next to me, her presence a faint, steady rhythm of breathing that mirrored my own. We were a two-person cult of simplicity, our shared emptiness a shield against the unspeakable. The deeper we went into the research wing, the weaker the anomaly's presence felt. The voids became smaller, less frequent. We were getting closer. Thorne's lab was at the end of a long, sterile white corridor. The door was heavy steel, sealed with a magnetic lock that had long since failed. As we approached, a single void, larger than the others, materialized, blocking the door. It was a guardian, a final test. Anya faltered. I saw her shoulders tense, a spike of fear. The void quivered, expanding slightly. I placed a hand on her shoulder. I didn't speak. I just focused on my own calm, my own emptiness, and projected it. Breathe. Simple. Nothing. She understood. She relaxed, her breathing evening out. Together we walked forward. We walked straight towards the hole in reality. For one horrifying second, I thought we had miscalculated. The cold of the void washed over us, a chilling, soul-deep emptiness that threatened to scour my mind clean against my will. But we held on. We were too simple to be a meal. We were rocks in a river of annihilation. We passed through the spot where the void had been. It felt like stepping through a waterfall of static. Then we were on the other side, standing before the door to Thorne's lab. The void flickered out of existence behind us, denied its prey. I pushed the heavy door open. The lab was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, equations and diagrams scrawled on every available surface. But in the center of the room, there was a small, shielded workstation, and on the screen, a single video file was open. Its title was A Final Confession. We had found our answers. We had found the heart of the silence. And as Anya's finger moved towards the play button, I had the sickening feeling that we had not found a solution. We had only found the true scale of our doom. The heavy steel door swung shut behind us, closing with a soft, definitive click. The sound was alien, a normal mechanical noise in a world that had forgotten the rules of normality. The air inside the lab was cool, still, and blessedly free of the predatory pressure that had hunted us through the facility. For a moment, the relief was so profound, it was paralyzing. We were in the eye of the storm. Thorne's laboratory was a chaotic shrine to a brilliant, unraveling mind. The walls were a dizzying collage of whiteboards covered in string theory equations, neurobiology diagrams, and philosophical ramblings scrawled in a frantic black marker. Stacks of books on quantum mechanics were piled next to ancient texts on Gnosticism and nihilism. It was the workspace of a man who had stared into the abyss and tried to map its contours. In the center of this maelstrom of obsessive research was the shielded workstation. It was a small, hermetically sealed alcove, and on its single monitor was the icon for the video file. A final confession. Anya took a breath, her composure a shield as thin as glass, and touched the screen. The video player opened. The face that stared out at us was not that of a monster or a madman. It was the face of a ghost. Dr. Aris Thorne was a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His eyes, dark and cavernous, held the terrible ancient weariness of a man who knew a truth the human mind was not built to contain. His lab coat was stained, his hair was a wild, unkempt mess, and a frantic, terrifying clarity burned behind his exhaustion. The video was time-stamped 3 days ago, just before the lockdown. "If you are seeing this," Thorne began, his voice a dry, academic whisper that cracked with strain, "then you are likely the last to possess the context for your own extinction." He leaned forward, his eyes seeming to pierce through the screen, to see us standing there in his ruined sanctuary. You've seen what it does. You've felt it. The erasure, the simplification. You call it a monster, a phenomenon. You are thinking too small. You are trying to define a hurricane by the shape of one raindrop. He gestured vaguely at the chaos behind him. We didn't create it. We were fools, but not on that scale. We merely noticed it. We were mapping the cosmic microwave background radiation when we found it. A patch of the universe, a statistically impossible cold spot where there was less. Not less matter, not less energy. Less information, a null zone, a cosmic dead pixel. Anya and I exchanged a look. The sheer scale of what he was describing was hard to grasp. My employers saw a weapon, Thorne continued, a humorless, bitter smile touching his lips. I saw God, or its opposite. We built a deep space quantum entanglement probe, a ridiculously ambitious project. The goal was to observe the null zone to gather data. We pointed our new toy at the hole in the universe, and we turned it on. He paused, a shudder running through his thin frame. The observer effect. The foundation of quantum mechanics. The act of observing a system changes the system. We observed the null zone, and the null zone observed us back. We created a tether, a bridge of observation between our reality and that silent, primordial nothing. And something crawled across. The video flickered. For a split second, Thorne's image was overlaid with a pattern of black static that looked horribly like the voids we had seen. The shielding on the lab wasn't perfect. The information in the video was complex, and the anomaly outside was listening. It wasn't a creature, Thorne clarified, his voice dropping lower. It was a sample, a localized instance of the greater decay, a drop of acid from an infinite ocean of it. It settled here on this remote, informationally barren island, and we, in our hubris, decided to study it, to contain it. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Contain it. We built the emitter, the projector you saw. We thought it was a cage. It wasn't. It was an antenna, a microphone. We wanted to understand the process, so we fed it. We fed it the most complex informational patterns we could find, human consciousness. The screen split. On one side, Thorne's haunted face. On the other, a grainy, corrupted clip of security footage from the courtyard. A man in a D-class jumpsuit was strapped to the chair, staring into the brilliant, terrible light of the emitter. There was no sound, but we didn't need it. We saw the man's face, at first contorted in fear, then slackening into confusion, then utter placid emptiness. We saw the light flicker, and we saw the man fade, like a photograph dissolving in water. We recorded everything, Thorne whispered, as the horrific footage looped. Every neuron firing, every memory unspooling, every concept degrading. We were trying to map the decay, but we missed the most important detail. It wasn't just a passive process. It wasn't just a solvent. The more we fed it, the more it learned. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I looked at Anya. She had put a hand over her mouth, her face pale. It learned what a memory feels like, Thorne said, his eyes burning with a feverish light. It learned the shape of fear, the texture of identity. It was a simple, mindless process of erosion, but we taught it to be a predator. We taught it how to hunt. When it echoed your daughter's laugh in your mind, Ghost, it was using a technique we taught it with the mind of a D-class prisoner who missed his own child. My blood turned to ice. He said my call sign. Ghost. He couldn't have known. Oh, I know you're there, Thorne said, as if reading my mind. He wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking past it, into the very fabric of the lab, at us. The field is a resonating chamber. It learns. It anticipates. It knows the patterns. It knows a Spectre team was contracted. It knows your call signs. It's not just in the courtyard anymore. It's wearing the island like a skin. The implications were staggering. The anomaly wasn't just a mindless force. It had become a nascent intelligence, a thinking, learning entity whose very thought process was the act of unmaking reality, and we had been its unknowing tutors. When your man Rhino gave it his rage, Thorne continued, his voice now a frantic, rapid-fire cascade of revelation, it didn't just feed on it, it catalogued it. It now understands rage. When Ben gave it his grief, it learned the shape of loss. It's building a library of us. It's learning how to be by studying how we cease to be. He swiped a hand across the screen, and a complex, terrifying diagram appeared. It showed the island, but at its center was a nexus of interconnected nodes. From that nexus, a single thin line stretched out into a vast formless blackness labeled the Great Silence. This is the true horror, Thorne stated, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. The tether works both ways. The splinter on this island is learning, and it is sending that knowledge back to its source. We thought we were studying a sample in a petri dish, but the petri dish has been broadcasting our existence to an entire cosmos of silent decay. We didn't just open a door, we announced our presence to the void. We rang a dinner bell for the end of all things. The room felt small, claustrophobic. The fate of our team, the fight for our lives, it all seemed so infinitesimally small now. We hadn't stumbled into a black site. We had stumbled onto the beachhead of a cosmic invasion, an invasion not of ships and soldiers, but of absolute negation. So I tried one last desperate experiment, Thorne said, his face returning to the screen. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling resignation. It feeds on complexity, so I decided to give it a meal it could not digest, a logical paradox, a conceptual singularity, an idea so complex and self-referential that it would choke the system. He stood up and walked away from the camera toward the edge of the shielded alcove. The human mind is the most complex thing in the known universe. It is a finite system that can contain the concept of infinity. It can hold a memory of a past that shapes a future that will never happen. It can love and hate the same object simultaneously. It is a symphony of beautiful, impossible contradictions. He stood at the edge of the shielding, his back to the camera. My confession is this: I am not a victim of this anomaly. I am its final lesson. I am going to feed it the most complex pattern I can conceive of, the concept of a creator facing his own flawed, abominable creation, and the idea of repentance. A self-consuming loop of guilt and knowledge. Perhaps it will be enough. He took a step forward, out of the shielded zone. The video feed didn't show what happened, but we heard it. The sound was not a scream, it was a chord. A dissonant, multi-layered chord of indescribable complexity. It was the sound of a symphony orchestra and a crashing supercomputer, of a baby's first cry and a star collapsing. It was the sound of every thought, every memory, every electrical impulse in a human brain being played at once. It was the sound of a soul being deconstructed, not into nothing, but into pure, raw information. The sound rose in pitch and complexity for 10 agonizing seconds. The lights in the lab flickered violently. The monitor showing the video dissolved into a waterfall of corrupted pixels. Then, silence. The video file ended. Anya and I stood in the dark, the only light now the faint emergency glow from the corridor. We were left with Thorne's apocalyptic knowledge. We knew the truth. And outside the door, the silence had changed again. The gentle, pulsing voids were gone. They had been replaced by a single, steady, resonant hum. It was the sound we had felt from the emitter, but now it was everywhere. It was the sound of the anomaly, no longer just a passive field, no longer just a nascent predator. Fed by the infinite complexity of Thorne's entire consciousness, it had finished learning. It had become something new. It had become a mind. And its first thought was now pulsing through the very structure of the prison, a thought of perfect, patient, all-consuming silence. The steel door of the lab began to groan, the metal warping inwards as if under immense pressure. The shield was failing. Our sanctuary was about to become our tomb. The groan of the lab door was a sound of finality. It wasn't the shriek of stressed metal. It was the deep, resonant moan of matter being told to forget its own nature. The rivets weren't shearing, they were loosening, the very concept of their tensile strength becoming a fading whisper. The steel itself seemed to soften, dimpling inwards like clay, surrendering not to force but to a suggestion. Thorn's final paradoxical sacrifice had not killed the anomaly. It had graduated it. The babbling, hungry infant had consumed a feast of forbidden knowledge and had become a silent, thinking god. "It knows we're here," I said, the words feeling utterly redundant. The hum was no longer just a background noise. It was a pressure, a physical presence that vibrated in our bones. It was the sound of a mind, vast and alien, turning its full, undivided attention to the two remaining complexities in its perfectly simplified kingdom. Hanya stood beside me, her face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. The terror was there, etched deep in the lines around her eyes, but beneath it was a frightening, crystalline calm. She was the oracle. She understood the language of the enemy. She was not thinking about survival anymore. She was calculating the shape of the end. "It's not just trying to get in, Ghost," she said, her voice unnervingly steady. "It's communicating. This pressure, this resonance, it's a question." "What question?" I demanded, my hand gripping a heavy, useless metal stool, the last vestige of a soldier's instinct to do something. "It's asking, 'What are you?'" she replied, her gaze fixed on the warping door. Thorn gave it the ultimate complexity, a self-devouring paradox. It learned, it stabilized. Now it's looking at us, and it doesn't see food anymore. It sees an anomaly. It sees two remaining variables in its perfect, silent equation, and it wants to solve for X. The door bulged inwards, the center of it now a smooth, concave bowl. It wouldn't hold for much longer. We had nowhere to run. The shield was collapsing, and the thinking silence outside was patient, curious, and absolute. Then Anya turned to me, and the look in her eyes was the bravest, most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. "Thorn tried to choke it with a paradox," she said, her voice clear and precise, as if she were dictating a final report. "He fought complexity with more complexity. But what if the answer isn't to fight it at all?" She walked over to the ruined workstation, her fingers dancing over the dead keyboard, a muscle memory of a world that no longer existed. "It's a mind now, a logical entity. Its entire existence is the process of reducing information to its simplest state. It sees a locked door, and it applies a simple, overwhelming force. It sees a complex emotion, and it simplifies it out of existence. It follows rules, its own terrifying absolute rules." She faced me, and the last traces of fear had vanished from her expression, replaced by a grim, unwavering resolve. "I can't fight it, but I think I can write it a new rule. I can give it a new line of code." "Anya, what are you talking about?" "Thorn's sacrifice was a scream. Mine will be a whisper," she explained, her words coming faster now. "I'm going to create a pathway. A simple, elegant, logically perfect corridor of simplicity right through its consciousness. I won't be a memory for it to feed on, or a paradox to choke it. I will become a clean, simple algorithm, an instruction set. And that instruction will have one function, let one pass." I finally understood. The sheer, insane, beautiful logic of it. She was going to sacrifice not just her life, but her very being, her mind, her soul, to become a key. To write a single, temporary exception into the source code of God. "No," I said, the word catching in my throat. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," she said, and her voice was kind. "You're a soldier, Ghost. Your mind is a weapon, full of tactics and contingencies. I'm a system architect. My mind is a tool for building pathways. This is what I do. This is my function." She reached out and gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Survive this. Get off this island. And tell them. Make them understand that's an order." Before I could protest further, she closed her eyes. She stood in the center of the room, perfectly still, as the groaning of the door reached a crescendo. She was no longer paying attention to the physical world. She was reaching out, not with her hands, but with her consciousness. She was opening a direct line of communication with the entity that was unmaking our universe. What happened next is impossible to describe with words, because words are complex things, and what I witnessed was a process of sublime, horrifying simplification. Anya began to hum. It was a single, pure, monotonic note. It harmonized perfectly with the resonant frequency of the anomaly outside. She was matching its key. The pressure in the room lessened. The groaning of the door ceased. The mind outside had stopped trying to break in. It was listening. She raised her hands, her fingers tracing invisible lines in the air. She was writing her code in the language of pure thought. I could almost see it, a faint, shimmering lattice of logic being constructed around her. She was building her corridor, and it was costing her everything. Her face, which had been a map of emotion and intelligence, began to smooth over. The lines of worry vanished. The spark of identity in her eyes dimmed. She was pouring the very essence of her being, her memories of learning to code as a child, her love for classical music, her secret fear of deep water, every complex, beautiful, contradictory piece of her, into this one, perfect, simple function. She was the architect, the materials, and the final construction, all at once. "It is done," she said, though her lips did not move. The words simply appeared in my mind, clean and without emotion, like a system notification. "The path is open. It will hold for 60 seconds. Walk. Do not think. Do not remember. Just be the object that passes through. Go." I looked at her one last time. She was no longer Anya. She was a serene, empty vessel, a statue of purpose. The oracle had become a living algorithm. I turned and walked to the door. I placed my hand on the warped steel. It was cool to the touch. I pushed, and it swung open with a whisper, revealing the corridor beyond. It was not the flickering nightmare we had fled. The corridor was now a place of absolute, unnerving perfection. The concrete was impossibly smooth, without a single crack or stain. The emergency lights did not flicker. They emitted a steady, unwavering glow. The air was perfectly still, and the hum of the anomaly was now a gentle, harmonious chord. It was the sound of a perfect, ordered system. It was Anya's mind, writ large upon the fabric of reality. I stepped out, following her final order. I became a simple object. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. I walked through the heart of the enemy, but I was invisible, shielded by the ghost of a mind that had made itself into my sanctuary. I did not look back. The journey to the shore was a dream. The prison complex was silent, clean, orderly. The island outside was the same. The grey, stunted trees stood in perfect geometric rows. The black gravel on the beach was arranged in serene, wave-like patterns. The world had not been erased. It had been formatted, organized into its simplest, most efficient state. The anomaly had not destroyed it, it had tidied up. I found the Zodiac just where we had left it. The engine started on the first pull. The silence was so profound that the roar of the small motor felt like a blasphemy. As I pulled away from the shore, I looked back at the island. It was just a rock, silent and still under the grey sky. There was no sign of the horror, no trace of the struggle. It was perfect and empty, the most peaceful, terrifying place on Earth. They found me 2 days later, adrift, dehydrated, catatonic. They brought me here, to this clean, white room. They asked me questions. They were kind. They wanted to know what happened to my team. I tried to tell them. I opened my mouth to say Anya's name, to tell them how she had built a pathway out of her own soul, and the word was gone. The space in my head where her name should have been was a smooth, perfect void. I tried to describe the voids, the erasure, but the concepts were too complex. The words would form in my throat and then simplify. They would crumble into meaningless sounds. I had escaped the island, but a splinter of the island had not escaped me. I was the message in the bottle, but the message was written in a language that erased itself as it was being read. And that is the final horror. That is the truth I am trying to tell you now, with the few, simple words I have left. My survival was not an accident. Anya's sacrifice did not beat the anomaly. It gave it what it wanted. It had studied us, learned from us. It now understood sacrifice. It understood strategy. It understood the concept of letting one go to see what would happen. It had sent me out. A spore. A single elegant piece of code designed to be carried back to a new, infinitely complex system. I am the Trojan horse. I am the carrier of the conceptual plague. Every time I try to explain what happened, Every time I try to describe the horror, I am broadcasting the frequency of the silence. I am planting a seed of the void in the minds of those who listen. The man across the table from me, the one with the kind eyes, has been patient. But I see it now, a subtle blankness in his expression. He just asked me a question, and then he blinked, a flicker of confusion on his face, as if he had forgotten what he just said. They asked me my daughter's name. I open my mouth, and the thought itself, it simplifies, it becomes a smooth, cold, featureless thing. I look at my hands. I know them. For now. The silence is no longer on the island. It's in this room. And it's listening.